Liberia, a country located on the west coast of Africa, boasts a rich history, vibrant culture, and diverse geography that has shaped its identity. The nation, bordered by Sierra Leone to the west, Guinea to the north, and Côte d'Ivoire to the east, has a long coastline along the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Liberia's history is deeply rooted in the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, with its establishment in 1822 by freed African American slaves who formed the American Colonization Society (ACS). These settlers, largely from the United States, established a colony along the coast, with the goal of providing a home for freed slaves and their descendants. Over time, the settlers formed a distinct ethnic group known as the Americo-Liberians, and they dominated the country's political and economic landscape for much of its history. Liberia declared its independence in 1847, becoming the first African republic to do so. The nation's formation was a significant moment in the history of the African diaspora, as it represented a unique experiment in self-governance and a return to the African continent for many freed slaves. However, Liberia's early years were marked by tension between the settlers and the indigenous African groups who had long inhabited the land. These indigenous communities, with their distinct cultures, languages, and traditions, often faced marginalization and discrimination from the Americo-Liberians. The social and political dynamics of this division would continue to influence Liberia's history for decades. The country's economy was initially built on agriculture, particularly rubber production, which became a major export after the arrival of large-scale plantations in the early 20th century. Firestone, an American company, established one of the world's largest rubber plantations in Liberia in the 1920s, further entwining the nation's economy with foreign investment and global markets. Liberia's colonial history, coupled with the exploitation of its resources, created a foundation for inequality and political instability. Despite being one of the few African countries not colonized by a European power, Liberia experienced a form of neocolonialism through the control exerted by American settlers and foreign corporations. Throughout the 20th century, Liberia's political landscape was marked by a series of shifts in power, including a period of relative stability under the leadership of President William Tubman, who served from 1944 to 1971. Tubman's government pursued a policy of modernization and development, but it also perpetuated the dominance of the Americo-Liberian elite, leading to growing discontent among the indigenous population. This discontent ultimately contributed to the rise of a coup in 1980, when Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, an indigenous man, overthrew President William Tolbert, ending over a century of Americo-Liberian rule. Doe's regime, initially hailed as a symbol of empowerment for indigenous Liberians, soon descended into authoritarianism and corruption. The early 1980s also marked the beginning of Liberia's descent into civil war. In 1989, Charles Taylor, a former government official, launched an insurgency against Doe's government, sparking a brutal civil war that would last for over a decade. The conflict was marked by horrific human rights abuses, including widespread massacres, the recruitment of child soldiers, and the complete breakdown of law and order. Multiple factions, both domestic and foreign, fought for control of the country, with Taylor eventually emerging as the leader of the country after Doe's capture and death in 1990. The war devastated Liberia, killing an estimated 250,000 people and displacing over half the population. The conflict also ravaged Liberia's infrastructure and economy, leaving the country in ruins. In 2003, after years of bloody fighting and international pressure, Taylor was forced into exile, and a fragile peace agreement was brokered. The United Nations deployed peacekeeping forces to maintain order, and the country began the slow process of recovery. In the aftermath of the war, Liberia faced significant challenges, including the need for reconciliation, rebuilding infrastructure, and addressing the needs of a population traumatized by the violence. One of the key milestones in Liberia's post-war recovery was the election of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in 2005. She became Africa's first elected female head of state and a symbol of hope for many Liberians. Under her leadership, Liberia made significant strides in rebuilding its institutions, stabilizing its economy, and gaining international support. Sirleaf's government focused on post-conflict recovery, education, healthcare, and infrastructure development, though challenges such as corruption, poverty, and unemployment remain significant. In addition to the political and social rebuilding efforts, Liberia also faced a public health crisis in the form of the Ebola outbreak that began in 2014. The epidemic claimed thousands of lives across West Africa, including over 4,000 in Liberia. The country's healthcare system, already weakened by years of conflict, struggled to respond to the crisis, but the international community, including the World Health Organization and various NGOs, mobilized to assist in containing the outbreak. By 2016, Liberia had successfully declared itself Ebola-free, but the scars left by the epidemic remained. Liberia's geography is as diverse as its history. The country is home to dense rainforests, rolling hills, and a rich array of wildlife, making it one of the most ecologically diverse nations in West Africa. The rainforest is part of the larger Upper Guinean Forest, which is a biodiversity hotspot, home to numerous endangered species. Liberia is also known for its many rivers, including the St. Paul, the Kavala, and the Lofa, which provide vital transportation routes in the interior. Agriculture remains the backbone of Liberia's economy, with rubber, palm oil, and timber being key exports. Despite its rich natural resources, Liberia remains one of the poorest countries in the world, with much of its population engaged in subsistence farming. Education and healthcare remain critical areas in need of improvement, as the country's infrastructure and services were severely impacted by years of civil war and political instability. Liberia's ethnic composition is diverse, with more than 16 distinct ethnic groups, including the Capel, Bassa, Geo, and Kru, each with its own language, traditions, and cultural practices. The Americo-Liberian culture, while still influential in the political sphere, is a minority compared to the indigenous groups. The country's religious landscape is predominantly Christian, with Islam also practiced, particularly among some of the country's ethnic groups. Liberia's culture is rich in music, dance, art, and oral traditions, with a vibrant tradition of storytelling, particularly in the form of proverbs and folklore. The country's cuisine reflects the agricultural diversity, with rice, cassava, and plantains being staples in many dishes. Liberia's capital city, Monrovia, named after U.S. President James Monroe, is the largest city and serves as the economic and political center of the country. The city has grown significantly since its founding, though it still faces major challenges related to urbanization, infrastructure, and poverty. As of the mid-2020s, Liberia's political landscape was continuing to evolve, with efforts to address corruption, promote economic growth, and enhance stability. In 2023, President George Weah, a former football star, was re-elected for a second term, continuing his efforts to steer the country toward progress. However, Liberia faces ongoing challenges, such as improving governance, tackling inequality, and ensuring that the benefits of development reach all segments of society. The nation's resilience, shaped by its complex history, will likely remain a crucial factor in its ongoing quest for peace, prosperity, and unity. Liberia's